Good evening, everyone. Here we are at another Thursday night at 7:30 p.m. for Living the Liberated Life with Dr. KJ. Tonight, we are excited that each of you have gathered with us. So we're just going to wait just a few more moments so that we can allow our audience to gather and grow. We want you to come on in, tell your neighbor, tell your friend, share this video. We want to see you in the building, see you in the house, for this is going to be a very informative, very important dialogue tonight. I do want to offer to each of you, I'll offer it now and I'll offer it again later on, that tonight's episode, I want to offer a trigger warning for any of you who will be watching tonight because of the subject matter of tonight's show. Tonight, first, let me welcome each and every one of you. This is the month of April. As you see, I am wearing my teal. I'm tealed out tonight because I am a survivor of sexual trauma, sexual assault. And tonight we are going to speak with another persons who have been victims but are now victors, survivors of sexual trauma. Not only is the month of April the month that we uplift sexual trauma, we're going to get all into that, but this is also the month that we uplift National Autism Awareness. We uplift alcohol awareness, alcoholism. We also uplift childhood abuse, child abuse, and we also uplift sarcoidosis month. This month is a month, every month has a few diseases or causes that are uplifted. But as you all know, if you follow me, if this is the first time following me, sexual trauma liberated to love is our whole premise is to bring awareness and to bring healing to those who have been victims of sexual trauma. Tonight, I am delighted, as many of you have seen in our ads and some of the promo, we have two men that were going to be joining us tonight. But unfortunately, one of our brothers, Brother Manshao Idu, who many of you have seen on during our Black History Month episodes, who is here with his lovely wife, he is unable to be with us tonight. I solicit your prayers, well wishes, and heartfelt healing powers to go to Brother Manshao as he lays in the hospital with COVID and pneumonia. Unfortunately, he will not be with us tonight. But we do love you, Manshao. If you're watching, if you're listening, we are sending our love and our prayers to you tonight. To our sister Nuasha, we send our love and well wishes to you as well. Tonight, and not only, let me just give you a little recap on a few things. Next week, not a recap, but a little foreshadowing. Next week, Thursday, turn to your neighbor wherever you are and say, next week, Thursday. Next week, Thursday is April 15th. Now, I know many of you are saying, that's income tax day. No, that is my birthday. So, woo! April 15th is my birthday. So let us keep that in mind as you all get your Cash App ministry together. No, I'm joking. But whatever the Lord should lead you to do, keep me in mind next Thursday. But next Friday, which is April 16th, happens to be the anniversary of Living the Liberated Life. It will be 1 year since we began with our very first episode of Living the Liberated Life. And during that episode, we talked about this very same topic, sexual trauma and the Black male. And our guests on that show were NBA star Kenny Anderson, and we had a therapist and former NFL player, Jay Barnett, who both joined us, and Kenny Anderson shared his story. Brother Barnett came and shared information about sexual trauma and dealing with sexual trauma. And so we are celebrating next week, we are celebrating another year, 1 year of living the liberated life. So I want you all to, we're going to show an encore presentation of that on my Facebook. We're just going to show what you are able to see on YouTube, and we want you to share with your friends and your families. But without further ado, I would like to bring to you, I figured because this is the 20th anniversary of Sexual Assault Awareness Month, tonight I wanted to bring a young man on to come and share his story. This young man, I only met him about a month ago. And we had such a bond upon meeting. Right away, we bonded. And he was able to open up to me. And he began to speak and share his story of sexual trauma and what happened to him. And I asked him at that time, would you be willing to come and share? And how many of you know out there that everybody may not be willing to share their story? Tonight, Brother James wants to share his story because he knows how important it is for those of us that are watching, those of us that have friends and family members, for us to get a little insight and an inkling on what happens to those of us that have been sexually traumatized or been in sexual assault relationships or situations. So Brother James is going to come. I'm going to bring him out, and he and I are going to have dialogue. And then we are going to bring Dr. Wilfred Ashley, who is a therapist, and he is going to come and give us some great information. So you still have time to get your friends and family to join us. So without further ado, I am going to bring to you my new little brother, my new boo, Brother James. Brother James.
Hi. Hey. How are you doing, Dr. KJ? How are you?
I'm doing great, Brother James. I'm doing wonderful. So good to see you tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Just turning up my volume to make sure that I can hear you and you can hear me and everybody can hear us, right?
Yes.
So, Brother James, why don't you introduce yourself to my audience tonight?
Hello, audience. My name is James. I'm 23. I live in Queens. I work as a veterinary assistant, and I also model part-time because I work full-time, of course.
And what does a veterinary assistant do? Tell us a little bit about that.
So at my old job, I was considered a technician. So at my old job, I definitely worked a little bit more hands-on with the animals. I still do have a lot of hands-on with them. So the veterinary assistant is essentially like the nurse of the practice. So when you go in, I'm the one you're speaking with first before speaking with the doctor. I'm the one that's going to go over charges with you. I'm the one that's going to go through your chart and say, hey, your dog is due for rabies, blood work, and etc. And then at the same time, I'm going to tell you the prices of those things because that's important as well. I'm the one, you usually speak with the doctor one time, while I'm the one who you speak with multiple times throughout your appointment. I'm the one who will help you from the beginning of the appointment to the end of the appointment, and probably after the appointment as well. I'm the one who relays blood work results, fecal results. I also am the one who will email estimates to you for spays, neuters, large surgeries that are, a lot more complex. And I'm also the one, when that time comes, for you to say goodbye to your pet, I'm the one who's going to help you through that as well. So, okay. I'm very involved with the whole veterinary process from like start to finish.
All right, James. Wonderful. James 23, right?
Yes.
23. Okay, James is 23 years. So, James, our topic tonight, we're talking about sexual trauma and the Black male,
yes,
and how that impacts our lives. But I want us to go back a little bit. Let's take it back to the very beginning of your journey. Can you share with us just tell us your story? How did your journey begin with sexual trauma?
So I'll say it's so funny that you brought this up because I actually was talking with a friend about this, like the beginning of everything, just the other night. And I was saying how it's so fresh in your mind, despite being so many years ago. So it kind of goes like this. So it was my middle school went from first grade all the way up to 8th grade. It was and all in one building. It wasn't like it was separated or anything like that. Like the same, you could be an 8th grader and pass 3rd graders in the hallway. Of that nature and things like that, or you could share a lunch period with them as well. They tried their best to kind of separate the grades at lunch per table, but obviously people mingle and people get up and they move to where their friends are and so on and so forth. So this was me in 6th grade, it was a spelling bee that day in school, and I'll never forget it because at the time in sixth grade I didn't really have many friends. I was kind of in an awkward place in my life. I knew that I was different from everybody else. I knew that being I knew that in my mind that I liked men and that I was not attracted at all to women. And I knew that from a young age, and not everybody is that clear in their identity at such a young age. But I guess the word is precocious, I learned. And that's kind of what I identified myself as. Just being a lot more mature for, being so young. So I knew that, and I was kind of in this awkward stage. So I didn't really have many friends. I was pretty closed off. At home, nobody knew. My one or two friends I maybe had in the neighborhood didn't know either. And it was this grade, and there was a spelling bee. And I remember I was sitting in there, and I was just kind of, looking at it go on, paying it no mind. Like, it was something to get away from class. And I never forget that the person who won the spelling bee, though, his name was Khalil Smith, and I'll never forget because when he won the spelling bee. He was doing so good, and I remember they got on the microphone. They was like, Khalil is gonna go on to do great things, and he's gonna go on to possibly be a lawyer or a doctor. His future is so bright. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I wanted that kind of popularity. Like, the whole school was looking at this individual, and a spotlight was being put on him. So he stayed in my mind, like, because of that. And I was like, wow. Like, so I was walking home that same day, and going up my block, I saw there was somebody like at the end of the block, kind of like as I was getting close, and they were like waiting to cross the street. So as I got up there, I realized it was him, and I was like, oh, like, but I didn't say nothing. I just kind of like looked and walked on by. As I walked on by, he reached out and was like, hey, like, don't you go to, like, I think we go to the same school. So I'm like, okay, like, we do. So, in this moment, I'm like surprised that he even noticed me. In my mind, I was invisible. To especially somebody like him who was so popular and so known throughout the school for his intelligence and so on and so forth. So I was like surprised. So and I didn't have many friends either. So I feel like that really played a role as well as to like how this even unfolded. Because I was a little lonely. I will say, like, I was lonely, and I sought like friendship from people. So I had that innocence about me. And we spoke, and I told him I loved animals. I told him I had a dog at the time. He mentioned he had a dog at the time, and I also realized that he lived close by. He said this was his house as we were walking down the block. So I'm like, oh, okay. And he's like, he mentioned his dog again. And he's like, do you want to see my dog? So, I'm like, so in this moment, like, because I feel like the school, had hyped him up so much, they kind of gave me, I want to say, almost a false security in him, because I was like, how could somebody who has such a bright future be bad? So, my stranger danger kind of went out the window. So I went into the house with him and met his dog. He had like some little white dog, like Maltese thing. I played with it. It was cute. It was nice.
Now
We
let me just
interacted.
ask you this quick question.
Yeah.
So you were in the sixth grade and he was in the eighth grade. Am I
Yes.
correct? Okay.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
He was about to graduate that year. So that's why the spotlight was on him, because he was going to go to high school, and he was going to go to a specialized high school. They were very proud of it, because you know how schools are, when they have their accolades go on to do greater and better things, it, reflects good on them. So, so back to the story, so I went inside, I'm playing with the dog, and I'm thinking to myself, like, this is nice. Like, somebody else who likes animals, like, they're smart. Like, I felt like I was hanging with the crowd of people that my mom would want me to hang out with. Like, I really didn't see anything wrong with it. Up until like it got a little strange. So we were kind of like in the living room, and he decided to say like, hey, why don't we go like to the basement? So I'm like, okay, like so I went to the basement. I thought it was a little weird at first. I was a little hesitant, but he said like he had a finished basement. So I went down there, and it was finished. They had like a couch, TV. It looked very like, I didn't really get no weird impression of that either. Not once I got down there. So we're down there, and I was kind of like, you're watching TV. And all of a sudden, he just turned his phone to me and was like, what do you think of this? And this is how it all started. So he's like, what do you think of this? And on the phone was gay porn. It was like two men having sex. And that was the first time I ever seen anything like that. So being young, sixth grade, and also struggling with my sexuality, I knew that this was I knew that this was gay. Like, I knew this was a homosexual activity. I knew that much, but at the same token, I was kind of confused because I felt very off from the energy that was just being given to me. Like, we're talking about dogs, we're watching like Family Guy or something. Like, where did this come
Right.
from?
This is
Like,
random. Mm-hmm.
so I just kind of was like, okay, strange. And I said, oh, he said, what do you think of it? And I said, I don't know. I said, I don't have any opinion. I honestly didn't know what to say. That was my first time seeing intercourse of any kind, so it was just a little weird. I was like, oh.
Mm-hmm.
So shortly after that, he was like, oh, okay, and he puts his phone away. And I thought that's what it would have ended at that moment. But then he proceeded, to show me his genitalia. And in that moment, I was like, oh, uh, like, oh, this is different. Like, it definitely, and like, once again, like, this innocence. This is the first time I'm seeing things like this. I've never had, at this point in my life, I never had the talk. I didn't know people existed to hurt other people in this way. Like, yeah, I had bullies and stuff here and there, but this is definitely a different area than bullying. Like, bullying, I know they don't like me. I'm like, okay, you don't like me, you make fun of me on a daily, it is what it is. I know where we stand. But this felt weird because he was being inviting and friendly, but at the same token making me uncomfortable. And I couldn't, at the time, I couldn't understand why this was, like, why did I feel uncomfortable? And why was he putting me in this predicament? And he just met. I was like, this is very strange. So that day, nothing. After that, like, he showed me, and he asked me to touch it. That was the final thing he ended the whole day with. Like, he asked me first. He asked me if I wanted to touch it. I said no, because I really didn't know what was happening. I just said no. But then he was like, just touch it anyway. Like, just one touch. So I was like, all right. Like, he was very persistent. So I just like that. Like, and I left and I went home and I had a headache. I remember that day. I had like the biggest, like, one of those worst headaches of my life. Like, I could not understand what I just went through. Like, I was like this, and I felt like I needed to say something to someone, but I didn't really have anybody to talk to. I didn't have any friends. It was just like me in my head. Like, my mom was really busy. She worked like 2 jobs. I stayed at home with my grandma. So, like, I didn't know what to say. So I just let it be and I went on. So maybe like a week or so passed, and once again, I'm walking home from school and I see him again, and he invites me over again. But this time, like, once again, it started off normal, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, maybe that was a one-time thing. Maybe he had a glitch in the system or something. I don't know, like, something. And I was like, like, because I'm still in my mind, because I'm still thinking about this spelling bee and how this bright future. They were saying things like he could be the president. Like, they were like hyping him up. So it just didn't make sense to me. It just was so weird. And then the second time when I went over there, I realized that was the time that he took it a little bit further. So once again, having a normal time, hanging out. Next, pulls out the genitalia again. So now I'm thinking to myself, like, here we are again. Like, now I'm seeing a pattern. Now I'm like, okay, now my brain is asking me, why does he keep doing this? Like, what is the reason? Like, I still couldn't understand the reason. I didn't understand why. So from that point, now he closed the door, and that's when like my fight or flight response started kicking in. And I was like, okay, like, why did he close his door and whip out his genitalia? Like, what's happening? So I stood up. I was like, well, like, I don't know what's going on. So then he kind of like, forced himself upon me, and, like, to make a long story short, without, I guess, getting super detailed, but like, forced upon me to the point where, like, it wasn't. He never raped me. That was the one thing that he I guess had morals about, was the actual act of penetration. Now, while using your imagination, there's obviously other things that can happen without penetration that's considered sexual assault. Oral sex without consent is considered assault.
Right.
Things of that nature.
Anything done to you without your consent,
like,
right?
Yeah. So one of the things he liked about me, I guess, was my lips. So he would try to kiss me when I would go there, and I didn't like. I was not attracted to him anyway. I didn't know what kissing really involved. I didn't want to know with him. So whenever he would try to do things of that nature, I was very resistant. I would just keep my mouth closed, and he would just kind of push his face up on mine, and it was just very uncomfortable. And he continued to do that, and this went on for quite some time, because we went to the same school, so he knew my path. He knew how to find me. And even after he graduated, there were people in the school that were affiliated with him. So I remember there was a time I was going to leave school, and I went the back way. Like, there was 2 ways to leave the school. There was like a one side on one street, and there was an exit on the other side. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go the other side, because on this particular day, like, I was at the time, I'm still struggling with being bullied in school. You know, my parents at the time were separated. There's tension there. My mom's not home that much. Spending time with my grandma. I didn't really have any friends, so I really was not in the right headspace for this to be on top of everything else that had going on. So I remember there was a day that I went out a different way in school, and then some like big girl who knew him was like, "Are you James?" And I was like, why?" And she was like, "Oh, somebody wants to see you." And like, I went to like move, and she kind of like grabbed me. And you know, in my school, is, you know, being 1st through 8th grade, there's so many kids out at the same time, so it's so hectic that this is something that gets missed. You know, like, oh, one kid being pulled around by somebody else, because it's a herd of kids and adults and parents, and it's just crazy. And I remember, like, I just felt like everything was moving so fast. And next thing you know, the crowd, I felt like, parted, and he was like right there. And I remember thinking to myself, like, like, and like, I just feel like I could not get away from him no matter what I did. So I quickly became very depressed. And like, and I got to a point where I would go over there, or not even go over there. I'd just be forced over there. And I would just disassociate. Like, the things would be going on to me, and I would just mentally not be here. And it got to a point where I remember I was like, I said to him very like deadpan, I was like, "I don't like this," and I wanted to stop. And he was just like, "I don't care." And I was like, well, like, and there was just like, there was a lot of little moments throughout this encounter, and it went on for honestly like a year and a half. And unfortunately, when then it finally got brought up to police, and it got brought up to police because there was a day, because he used to threaten to kill me, and that's why I never told people. Anytime I would leave there, he'd be like, you know, "Make sure you stay quiet because I know where you live," and things of that nature. And he used to tell me where he would hide my body if he did kill me. And you know, and he kind of, it was very like, it was very mentally just, what's the word, destructive. Like, it was just breaking me down. Like, oh, and it just got to a point where the final day that I was fed up with it, he threatened to kill me again, and I was just like, "Do it." Like, I'm not. I was like, I'm not going over there. I was like, "You can't make me go in there." Like, I'm gonna scream. I made it my mind. I was like, I can't take this no more. And
so James, at this point, at this juncture where he's threatening to kill you, so you've given us, you told us this started, you were in the 6th grade, he was in the 8th grade, right?
Yeah. So now at this point in the story, I'm like in the 7th grade, and he like the end of the 7th grade, and he was, you know, obviously in high school at this point.
Okay, so now so this is a year. This has been.
Yeah, so it went on for a year. All the things that I just kind of went essentially like throughout, maybe not necessarily every week or even every day, but throughout a year it went on. Like, I had a cell phone, so he had my number, of course. And he would just call, like, sometimes he would call me, sometimes he'd be like, "Listen, I'm outside the school." Sometimes he'd be like, "I'm on the block," like, because we lived on the same block, the same street. It was a street that had multiple streets to it, going down, like, kind of like how Merrick Boulevard, for example, if you think of, it's just one long strip, but it's all Merrick. That's kind of like my street. So yeah, we lived on the same block, but it was a couple of blocks away. But at the same token, I had to go down the block to get home. And then if I didn't go, like, if he didn't see me, or if I made it home, maybe by like avoiding him, then like, here comes the death threats. Here comes the, "Be careful when you leave in the morning." Here comes the, "I know what time you get out. I know exactly what classes you have, what teachers you have. You don't know who I know in the school," this, that, and the third. And it just made it very scary for me. And I remember the first couple of times that I tried to like avoid him and I felt like the following day I was like, I'm gonna die. Like, I was so convinced that he was going to hurt me that, like, I remember one time I didn't go to school because the following day, like, he threatened to kill me, so I didn't go to school. And like, nobody really knew what was going on, and it just started shutting down. I remember that time in my life, I was very unhappy. I used to just walk home from school slowly by myself. I used to count the minutes it used to take me to get home. I knew when I was happy, I remember it took me 7 minutes to walk home on a good day. If I really wanted to get home, it took me exactly 7 minutes to get home. But then I started taking 30 minutes to get home. I remember it took an hour. I took 2 hours one time. I just stood around one time at like a deli because I didn't want to go home. because I didn't want to possibly have to deal with that. And it just got to a point I was just so depressed. And then, you know, and then it caused issues at home, of course, too. You know, I'm at home, I'm getting recluse. Nobody knows what's wrong with me. They think that it's something else. Nobody knows about my sexuality either. So it made it even harder to even come out afterwards, because once the assault, you know, was brought to light, I was questioned. I was asked. I remember when I told my mom, I guess I'll go to the day I told her. So the day I told her, he called me. I didn't go there. He was threatening to
Before
kill
you
me.
go to that, before you
Mhm.
go to that, I'd like to just bring,
Yeah,
we'll introduce him, but I'd like to just bring him on, so because
yeah.
I'd like him to be able
He's
to really
okay.
be active participant. Okay, so I'm going to bring Dr. Ashley in. I see him backstage, and
Okay, perfect.
I'm going to go ahead and bring him in. Um, Allow him, and then I want you to go ahead and share with us about the day that you shared your story or you told your
Okay.
mom. Okay.
Yes.
And so, Dr. Ashley, welcome, my brother. Dr. Ashley, how are you? Can you hear me? Oh, you can't hear me? I don't know why.
He said I
I
can
don't.
see you, but I can't hear you.
Right. Can you hear me now? I don't think he can hear me now. So, Dr. Ashley, why don't you go out and come back in? I don't know. Well, if he can't hear me, then he can't hear me saying that, right?
Hmm.
Okay, let me put something in the notes. Go ahead, James. Go ahead and share what you were going to share.
Okay. Okay. Are you
Mhm.
sure?
Yes, yeah, because we're going to try to
Oh,
get Dr. Ashley together. All right.
okay. All right. So the day that I told her he had threatened to kill me, she had came home early from work, and I was on the phone, and he called me, and I was on the phone, and he's getting upset, so he's raising his voice, and he's like, you know, if you tell anybody this, that, and the third, and I started crying, and I was crying like, you know, just at this point it was very pent up, and I was just like, leave me alone, and I was sobbing and I was screaming, and I just
Mm,
had reached my limit. So while I'm making all this noise in my room, unbeknownst to me, my mom is coming in the door, and
mm-hmm.
I heard, and as I'm like mid rant on why I'm like just like I'm just screaming like leave me alone. I didn't even care what he had to say. I was just like leave me alone, leave me alone, leave me alone, just leave me the like I was just like leave me alone. And um and as I'm going through that, my mom's like, who are you talking to? She's like, who like what's going like she came in, I'm crying, you know, I'm sweating, I'm crying. She doesn't know what's happening. So finally I had to tell her what was going on. Like, and only until so I told her, so we sat down and she's like, what's happening? So I told her about the boy, you know, where he lived, and you know, that I was being sexually assaulted by him, and not this and physically assaulted as well, because he did hit me a couple of times as well.
Mm,
So I'm sharing all this to her, and you know, the first thing she did was she hugged me, showed me she loved me, and we got my grandma in the room, and you know, we all are sitting together now, and we're like, okay. So she shared with me that she also was a victim of rape. So this is extremely heartbreaking for her. You know, she's like, not to say that men don't have sexual assault. She's like, but you know, I thought that maybe by you being a man that you wouldn't have to go through what I went through.
right.
She's like, so I'm so sorry that you even went through anything even remotely similar to that, because I share your pain. So that was comforting, and you know, and in that moment we really had to like band together as a family and decide what the next best course of action was. So she then asked me if I was gay. So I knew the answer, but in the, you know, with the circumstances of the time, I didn't want any, you know, I didn't want anybody to use any reason for why this went on. I don't want somebody to be like, oh, he's gay, he wanted it. Like, I didn't want that kind of narrative
Right. Right.
either.
Right.
So what I told her was I wanted, but I also wanted to be honest with her. So what I lied. I told her I was bisexual. That way,
Mm,
it was a yes and a no at the same time. That
right.
was my
Right.
like middle ground. Can Dr. Ashley hear us now? No.
I guess not.
Okay.
Good.
So that was my middle ground to it. So the next step on the next course of action was she said we need to call the police. And she's like, I'm gonna have to tell your father about this because it's serious, you know, he should be involved, you know, we're gonna go there. Like I don't want to go by myself
Absolutely.
necessarily. This is about, you know, I don't know how this is gonna turn out. I just feel like your dad needs to be here for this. At the time, you know, them being separated, I used to go see him every other weekend, sometimes every weekend. So I would only see him like 2 days a week, alternating weeks. And like our relationship wasn't the best. Like me and my mom were definitely closer than me and him by miles. So, and I've also heard him talk ill about homosexuals and homosexual activity. Like if two men kissed on TV, he used to be like ill and change the channel. And or like I remember one time, my stepmom had something on and it showed like two men interacting, holding hands, and he came in and was like, turn this, you know, effing stuff off and like snapped. And I remember I looked at him and I just kind of like mentally like took like sighed to myself, and I was like, I remember in that looking back, I said to myself, I'm never gonna tell him. Like I did not, like I was never gonna tell him because like he's a big dude, like he's like 6'7", you know, he's intimidating. You know, he embodies a lot of masculine traits. He loves cars. He works out. So, you know, I was like, you know, me being like his little gay son, I'm his only son. I was like, and the way he talks about gay men, I was like, this is not going to work out. So I really did not want my mom to tell him about the sexual assault. I begged her. I cried. I said, please don't, because I knew what it was going to do in the long run. Even if she couldn't see it, I could see it, and it did exactly just that. She tells him, here he comes over, do-rag, wife beater, bat, like the whole nine. He's like, why did you let this happen to you? I'm like,
wow.
And I said, I'm like, and then my mom jumped in before I even responded. She's like, wow. So you know, now they're in person, they're clashing, and you know, they ultimately was like, you know what, let's stop for a second. And you know, my mom was like, I can't believe you. How can you say this to him? So this just making me feel even worse. Like I'm just going down the rabbit hole at this point. I'm not talking to nobody. I'm just watching everybody argue. And we go over there. We walked over there too. We didn't even drive because that's how close he lived to me. I was able to walk up the block with my family.
Wow.
We immigrated to family. And I remember the police came. His parents were like, I remember one thing about it. So his parents opened the door. They don't know what's happening. So they're like, how can I help you? And you know, my dad's the one who spoke, and he was like, my son here says that your son sexually assaulted him. And I'm like right. And I don't know how they're gonna react. So I'm just waiting for. So the first thing I remember, I'll never forget. I heard her say something like again or this again. Like the mother says something like that of that nature to make me think that I'm not the only one for this man. And I remember that stuck with me because she said that and my eyes got wide and I was shy, but I really wanted to be like, what do you mean? Like it made me jump to be like, what do you mean again? Like, but I kept it to myself because my dad was so enraged that and he told me not to talk as well.
And let's put this in perspective again, because I believe that Dr. Ashley can hear us now. Dr. Ashley, yes. Brother James, we'll let you formally introduce yourself, but we're right in the throes of this conversation. And James shared with us that his abuse started when he was in the 6th grade. And his was at the hands of another young man who was in the 8th grade. Mm-hmm. And at this point, we are a year in, correct, James? Correct me if I'm wrong. We're approximately a year into this abuse, and now it has escalated to not just sexual trauma or sexual abuse or assault that's taken place, but it has also become physically violent. And he has also threatened his life. Threatened to kill him. And let's just keep this. I want for our guests, I want you to keep in mind and keep in perspective. These are children. James is the man. He said this man, but this is not a man. This is, at this point, this young person is in like the 9th or 10th grade at the point where he is being confronted. So when James says he goes to the house and speaks to the mother says, again, we're thinking about a 10th grader that makes him about 15 years old, right? Approximately 15 years old. I think that is something really key, because so often when we think about sexual trauma, we think about sexual abuse, we think about it happening at the hands of a stranger or somebody. You know, I remember back in the day, we would see movies where a rapist quote unquote, would be the person hiding in the bushes, right?
Yes.
Right. Grabs you, rapes you, leaves you on the side of the road, things like that. But what we've come to know statistically, that by far the majority of individuals that get raped or are victims of sexual trauma or abuse, it is at the hands of someone they know, a family member, a friend, a husband, a wife. Oftentimes people don't even consider how in the world can a husband and wife, and we'll get into that. But I just wanted to put this in perspective for Dr. Ashley, as well as some of you that just jumped on and just began to watch, that what James is talking to us about is a young man who is only 2 years older than him at the time of this abuse, and they are children. So often we tell people, watch your child around the older people, the older uncle, the older aunt, the older babysitter. But this is his peer. They're in elementary school, junior high school together. And this sexual trauma has taken place. So James, go ahead. Go ahead and finish telling us about what transpired.
Just one moment. I just need to put some air on because it is hot in this room. 1 second.
Oh, okay. All right.
Put on some air. Hold on.
Telling the story. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Yeah.
Why goes put air on? Actually, 6 out of 10 people that have been victimized are they knew the person. It was, like you said, it was a family member, it was a friend, it was a relative, it was person was not unknown. And so unfortunately, it's very common that it's someone that you know. And I'll say a little bit more about that a little later, but in my clinical practice, everyone that I've come in contact with, they knew the person. It wasn't, dragged in the hallway or kind of a thing. It was, no, I know this person and they know me. They know my family.
Right. Or they are my family. That's my case.
Exactly.
Or they are my family. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And so
very common experience.
Yeah. So James, we're going to go ahead and let you finish, and then we're going to get some more insight from Dr. Ashley. Yes.
So once we got to the house and they said that, I then sat down on like the neighboring steps just to kind of just sit there and just kind of let everything unfold. I wasn't going to go into the house. My mom, I believe, went into the house, and I think my dad did as well, but I stayed outside with the police and kind of answered a bunch of questions. And I remember one of the questions so the police came, and the police were also were pretty dismissive looking back. That's the perfect word for it now that I think about it. So the police come and they see me. At the time, I didn't, I guess, look as masculine as I look today. So they profiled me, and they looked at me probably the same way that the kids in my middle school who bullied me looked at me and judged me and made their assumption of me. And the reason I say that is because, I'm telling them what happened, kind of like similar how I'm speaking with you guys and going down the rundown of how this all started, how this all unfolded. And one of the police officers, he looked at me and he said, "Was this consensual?" At the time, I didn't even know what the word meant. So I say to him, I said, "What is consensual?" And he says to me, "Did you want this? Did you want this to happen?" And I said to him, "Why would I want this to happen if I called the police? Why? Why?" I was offended. I was like. And then he just kind of wrote some things down, and he was like, "Okay," and he walked away. And I sat there, and I just remember I just was like, I don't know what to do. I was just lost. I didn't know what to do. I was like, we have the police here. They obviously are not going to help me the way I thought they were going to help me. My dad and I's relationship is now probably going to be non-existent, and now my mom is super emotional. It just was just not a good situation. And ultimately, I got an apology. And, between the parents, I don't know what was discussed inside without me. Even till this day, I don't really know what was discussed. But they came to some conclusion to not press charges. And the mother of him came to me and told me that I had nothing to worry about. Moving forward, she told me that, I can walk down this street and feel safe again. And, and just some things. And that's kind of all she really said. She just kind of wanted to make me feel a lot better. She hugged me as well. She said, "I'm sorry." But that was all she could say. And, moving forward, I thought that that's kind of where it would have stopped. in terms of dealing with this, and it honestly felt like a weight was lifted. In the immediate, it felt like a weight was lifted at the same time. I was sad that it unfolded this way, but I was happy that it was over in that regard. And I remember going into 8th grade and not having this looming over my head. And 8th grade was like out of all the years I spent in that middle school, because I was in this middle school from first to 8th grade. 8th grade was the happiest I was ever in that middle school.
Wow.
None of the other years I was definitely not happy. I can say that with 100% certainty that probably 2nd through 7th grade I was not happy.
Wow.
I was just miserable. I had 2 friends. I made my 2 friends, I think, in 7th grade when this was reaching a close, and I was actually starting to feel a little bit more like me, and not having this looming over my head, so people could see that I'm fun to be around, and not because people didn't even want to talk to me. I was just quiet. I got bullied. I think probably people didn't even understand why I was being bullied. I got called all these, gay slurs and stuff, and for the longest time, up until that 7th and 8th grade, I didn't even defend myself. I just let them say it to me, and one of the things the teachers used to always say was, "Oh, don't argue. Just tell me, and I'll handle it." And they never did. They never did. They used to sometimes witness people insult me in front of them, and I'd walk right up to them and just look at them, and they'd be like, they'd literally say, "Get into the classroom," and I'd be like,
Yeah.
and it just hurt, and I got to a point where I was very respectful growing up. I was taught to respect adults. I was taught to respect the chain of command. If the teacher says to do this, then you do that, and you don't question it. The teacher's almost like your mother, almost, like a parental figure.
Right.
But
Right.
towards the end, I stopped. I was like, listen, if these people are going to keep insulting me and stuff, I'm going to defend myself. And if you don't want to help defend me either, you're an accomplice to this. You're encouraging this behavior. I'm not. I may have been probably one of the only people that dealt with bullying in my in my grade or my class. I guess that was the main focus of most people's aggression. But even then, like, they saw that and they still didn't help. You would think that, okay, if this one person is the victim of multiple people, that it would prompt adults to step in and be like, hey, let's help him and stuff. But it didn't. And there was just that middle school. I never visited back. It just wasn't a place of happiness for me. Like, a lot of people have gone back, and I personally never did. And then what I mean by saying that, I thought that's where it ended. Technically, yes, that is where it ended. I didn't see him again after that. I eventually did see him years later, but not on my, just out of bumping into each other kind of thing. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But what I meant is, like, he not only did he do that to me, but he spread the word around to some degree that this is what he was doing to me, or maybe even to a point where he must have said that it was consensual. Because I remember one time I was scrolling through Facebook and somebody messaged me, and I didn't know them. I knew they had went to the school, but I didn't know them. And they were older as well, and they were like, "Oh, I heard what you did with so and so." And I remember I was in shock. My heart dropped. Like, I felt like something that happened to me that was, that damaged me in privacy, in my privacy. Like, my privacy was being exposed. I felt like I was being exposed. I didn't even know what to say. I didn't even respond to the message. I just closed Facebook, and I just sat there, and I didn't know what to do. And and I just got to a point where I just was like, okay, if anybody says that this is what he did, I'm going to deny it. That's what I said. I said, if anybody comes up to me in middle school, if anybody says, hey, did you do, I'm going to deny it. I'm going to deny it. And I convinced myself that. And maybe only one time somebody was like, hey, do you know so-and-so? And I said, no, I don't.
Well, James, were you ever able to confront him after? I mean, I know that you confronted him.
So that's what I'm gonna get into. So, after high school, I started working at an animal hospital. My first job, my second job, I guess. I worked at PetSmart for like a couple of months, but I got my first real job in the animal hospital. I love animals, so I was working at this place, and I started making some friends there. And I remember it was very early on into me working there, and I feel like that's important to this story as well, because people don't know me. I hadn't shared nothing with them. Some of them, I think they had just found out that I was gay. They just found out, and it was like a month in. And I remember I was at work, and I was on like a dating app at the time, and I got a message on the dating app, And to my shock, it was a Wednesday. I'll never forget. It was a Wednesday, and to my shock, he messaged me. He messaged me on the dating app that many years later, and I was so in shock. Like, he just started the conversation with this hi, and I remember thinking to myself, why on God's green earth did he think this was okay? What like, I called the police on you. Like, I don't understand how your brain thinks that this is okay. Like, you should have blocked me before you did this. Like, that's what you should have did. You should have blocked me so that I couldn't see your profile. But instead, you took the time to message me.
Mhm.
So, but now I'm an adult. I'm a little bit stronger than I was back then, and I was ready to say what I needed to say that I couldn't say when I was younger. So the first thing I said to him is, "Why are you messaging me?" And he said to me, "Well, I'm seeing you now, and I want to get to know you." So I laughed to myself, and I told him, I said, "You have hurt me for a lifetime." I
My
said,
God.
what you've done to me, I cannot get back. I said, you have taken things from me that I wanted to have with other people. I said, you took my first kiss from me. And it was like a big message I sent to him. I was like, you took my first kiss from me. You took intimacy from me that I wasn't ready to give to you. I said, you touched me in places that I have never been touched before. And now I don't even want to be touched. And I was like, and you think that this is okay, that I want to get to know you? I told him that he can honestly go to, and that's how that went. And he blocked me. He blocked me after that. And maybe a little bit after that, we went to vote. I think it was like around maybe Obama's election, and or around that time was when we were at the polls, and the polls are like by zip code, I guess. And me and my mom were in line, and I said, "That's him." I showed her, prior to that, she hadn't seen him in years, but I said, "That's him." Like, he looked a little different, but I said, "That's him."
Yeah.
And, we looked at him, and it just goes to show you how life, or karma ultimately gets back to you. He was hideous. He was repulsive. Like, he was, he had gained a lot of weight. His facial hair was long. He wasn't the star of my middle school anymore. He wasn't that valedictorian that he graduated as. He was like a shell of that person. But I said, and I felt like, and I told my mom, I said, and look at me. I said, I'm thriving. I said, I'm not the person I was back then. I said, now I'm that person to be the light that he was at the time. And I was like, that just goes to show you. I was like, I suffered through this and I made it through it, but ultimately it made me stronger. And at the time, there was times when it shortly ended, that I used to go on the bus going back and forth from high school, because I graduated in 8th grade, so I was going back and forth from high school. So in high school, it's still relatively fresh, just a year or two back. And I used to, and ironically enough, our high schools wasn't that far either. I didn't know that either until one time I thought I saw him on like the street while my bus was going. I was on the bus and I saw him on the street, and that's when I realized, and I researched him. I went and found his whole information to see what high school he went to and why he was so close to me. And I realized that, his high school is like 10 blocks away from mine. So now he's taking the same relative bus route, I guess, to get home, because once again, we live in the same block. So I'm like, okay. But in this time, like when I used to see him or think I saw him, I used to get so scared. Like I would hide. I'd put my hood on. I'd put my hat on. One time I got off the bus, I thought he was in the back of the bus. I got off the bus. I walked a different route home, because my bus technically will stop at my block. Like, it'll stop at my block and let me just walk down. But I didn't want to do that, because I'm like, if I get off that stop, he's probably going to get off that stop. So let me get off 10 blocks away and take this back road way home to avoid that entirely. So I used to do that. And now when I saw him at that polls, I felt empowered, because I didn't feel like I wanted to hide. In fact, I said, I want him to see me. I said, I want him to see me. I want to make eye contact so that he can see where I am in life now and where he is in life now. To show the
so now, James, you said some powerful things. You said a lot of things, and I just want us to be able to dive into some of the things that I jotted down, a few things that I think are very interesting. And I want Dr. Ashley to hear and kind of speak to some of the things that you spoke to. Some of these things that you spoke about was you were seeking friendship, and that you had no friends and you felt lonely. And that this young man, you felt as if he baited you. It was almost like a bait and switch because he was so kind. He baited you with this animal because he knew that you had a love for animals. So he baited you to get you to come into his home. Then something else you said that you never had the talk. There's something I want some of the parents and the adults that are watching, that you were in the 6th grade and no one at this point has had the talk about sex with you or even sexuality with you, even though they saw that you were struggling with your sexuality. And you felt as if once you endured what transpired, you felt as if you had no one to talk to. You felt like you were alone in what you experienced. And then the other thing that kind of jumped out to me, and I too, you struggled with this whole apology thing, right? When he came and he apologized to you. And when I had a conversation with Dr. Ashley earlier today, I will share this. A few years ago, a few years ago, on my birthday, I remember it was 8 something in the morning. I happened to look at my email, and my abuser had written me a letter, sent an email to me, and wrote me a letter apologizing to me for what had transpired. Even though when I had confronted him years prior, he told me he did not do that to me. But now, several years later, he admits it in this letter, and shares that he wanted to come into a public apology, all these different things. I was having the very first Liberated to Love conference, and that's when he wrote, because he had seen on social media the ads and all of that. And so he apologized. Now, I never responded to it. So technically, he does not even know if I received the email, right? He knows because I've spoken to other family members and let them know that I received the letter and how it made me feel. And what I've had to convey is I have forgiven him. And I tell you today, if he's watching, I have forgiven you. But there is a difference between forgiving someone and going through the journey of forgiveness, which is a process, right? Forgiveness being a process, and being reconciled and coming back into the right relationship with someone. It is not just because I've forgiven you does not mean that we go on road trips together, right? Right? No. Does not mean we're going to dinner. I'm celebrating you celebrating me. We're going shopping. No, that's not what forgiveness is about. Me being set free from the burden of the offense. You have offended me. And when it comes to sexual trauma and sexual abuse, you have a book called The Body Keeps the Score. My body is keeping the score of what you have done to me, what you have done to James. And one of the things I tell people all the time, because my sexual trauma took place when I was very young. I was younger than James. And one of the things that I often say when people would ask me when I was younger if I was a virgin, I don't know if I was a virgin because I thought virginity was something you give, not something taken. And essentially, my virginity was taken from me. It was ripped from me. And it was not one time. It was not 2 times. It was several times and years. And so, the trauma, the impact, the wounds, they have been wounds that I had to now go through a process of healing, a process of deliverance. Because if any of us know anything about sexuality, listen, we are so caught up in sexually transmitted diseases, but they're also spiritually transmitted demons. And so sometimes those same demonic spirits become transmitted onto you, but that's a whole nother story. But now, my brother, Dr. Ashley, excuse me, Reverend Dr. Ashley. Why don't you share some of your insight? You've heard a lot tonight so far. You've heard a whole lot between James and the little tidbit that I shared. What would you have to share or offer to this conversation tonight?
So first, I want to thank you for the invitation to join this rich conversation, and I thank both you and James for your courage to be able to share your story and to share it publicly and to share it with such insight and such passion. And clearly, I can hear the elements of healing taking place in both your lives, and I can hear the elements of pain and suffering and struggle. And so I just want to thank you, as I'm sure everyone that's listening and will listen is appreciative, because you're opening up doors that oftentimes people are afraid to open, and they're afraid to walk down that road, those roads, if you will. And so, as you said earlier, it's usually not a stranger. I mean, there are the moments, we see on television. Clearly, law enforcement would tell those times when you have someone who's raped, someone they did not know. But unfortunately, more often than not, it's someone that we do know. And like you said, it could even be a family member. And so one of several things. One, as you alluded to, James, not too long ago, it wasn't your fault. And sometimes we're made to feel as though it was our fault. If I didn't wear this, if I didn't ask these questions, if I didn't come across, maybe I came across flirtatious. And so we start doing a lot of questioning of our own person if we're self-reflective. And so one of the starting points for me in therapeutic conversations is it wasn't your fault. You should not take responsibility as though you did something wrong. The person had, especially in the case you just both described, they were older, they knew better, and they made a decision that had nothing to do with something that you did. It's also not unusual that there's my terminology. I'm sure there's something more scientific, but it's the hook. It's the being nice to you, like you said. It's the befriending you. It's something that encourages you to let your guard down. It's something that says, okay, I may intellectually know better. However, this person seems to be safe. They're meeting a particular need. I need a friend. They're coming across as friendly. And again, that's the hook piece that happens. They're much different if somebody follows you in the hallway and going into your apartment or something totally different. But in what you're describing, it's that kind of hook. Here's the need that they are acting as though they're going to support. So therefore, I let my guard down, and I can get closer. To what you were saying, Doc, there is this notion that parents have the taught, and some parents are better at it than others. Some parents avoid it. Some parents farm it out and say, well, the school system will talk about it. They'll learn about it in some other venue. Unfortunately, or one of those venues almost never is church. We are extremely hypocritical, I find, in that regard. And when it comes to sexuality, we just do a horrible job at that. That's
Absolutely.
not something that we do well. And I don't want to blame it on seminary. Clearly, seminaries tend not to teach us how to address it or really give us good insights, nor do graduate schools. But it goes beyond that. We have some theological misconceptions and misunderstanding of biblical truths that we use and hide behind. And so that's a whole nother show one day to talk about all the craziness and all the bad theology that takes place in the church. One of the moments in my life when I had a brain freeze and I went on Fox News. Even saying it is
right. Fox, right.
Yeah. But a friend of mine took ill and said, hey, they need somebody last minute. Would you go on in my place? Like, yeah, okay, fine. And so anyways, I had this brain freeze, went on Fox News, and it was actually talking about this topic, which in and of itself, I should have known better as a Black Baptist preacher to be on Fox News to have this conversation. But the first 20 minutes actually went well because that was more informational. It was me sharing information and resources, and we were doing well. Then we had the call-in part, and I said it to say, and one of the callers, I'll never forget, was a Black Baptist pastor from Ohio. and he ran the checklist. And I know at this point in my life as a therapist, that when it's people start doing the checklist, here comes the boom. So you're a black pastor. Yeah, I'm a black pastor. You went to seminary. Yeah, I went to seminary. You have a congregation. Okay. Get to the point. Here it comes. And he says, so how can you support gay, lesbian, transgender, queer thinking? And you say that you're all of these things. And if I was in your congregation, I was one of your officers, I'd vote you out.
Mm.
And it went downhill from there. And there was nothing that I could say, there was nothing I could say that could turn that around. And it just began to snowball. And so when you were describing some of the things that had happened and the reactions, there were parts of me that hurt, because I'm this was 10 years ago. I'm still like, wow, that was really rough. I've been in scenarios where let me say it differently. There's this conversation that we have among black scholars sometimes, and that oftentimes we spend more energy describing what we're not. And as a Black Baptist pastor, I realize that's important. I'm not anti-gay, lesbian, transgender. I'm not homophobic. I'm not trying to shame. Now, part of that can really be personality, how we grew up in our household and our family. Could be being a psychoanalyst, marriage and family person. For whatever the reason, I think it's important that when you find caregivers and you select a congregation or a faith tradition and you settle on a community of believers, to see if there's real transparency and honesty around this issue of sexual abuse, the issue of gay, lesbian, transgender, etc. And I wasn't a real fan of the term, but I think it's the best thing we have right now. Will they welcome you? And I think I go beyond feeling welcomed. I've been having this conversation the last couple of weeks with folks. It's one thing to welcome you because you check the boxes. You're a woman, or you're a black guy in a white situation, or you look good on the brochure. You have the right credentials, so on the website it's attractive. So that's the welcoming part. But I think that it's important for us to have a sense of belonging. And where do we belong? And
the reality, to your point, the reality is the church, many of our community organizations are not a safe space. And we're not talking about, gays, transgender, and those things. We're talking about just those that have dealt with sexual trauma, period. The minute you bring that topic up, I'll be very honest with you. When I first started to bring this topic to light, people, the comments that came to me, people not gonna want to share their dirty laundry. One of the first things I asked you, James, are you okay? Would you be willing to do this? Because I know several men, several women that have been victims or are survivors of sexual trauma, but they are not willing to share their story, not publicly. It's hush hush. No, don't tell anybody. Oh, that didn't happen to me. No, even when it comes to just supporting Liberated to Love and supporting the movement, people don't want to be associated with it. Don't talk about it. And what I've discovered is some of them, those persons that are so afraid to talk about it, are individuals oftentimes that have been impacted personally or witnessed it, right? And so I'd like to say to that point, let's talk about the community. Like how do you deal with it within the community, as far as James, for you, your dating life is different than my dating life, right? As one who is, I am a heterosexual female, and you are a
homosexual male.
Okay, I want you to say it, right? And so, I probably wouldn't go hang with you anywhere because we'll be looking at the same people, but I was like, he's fine. Yeah, he is.
Right?
I'm like, James, sit down, right? But that's a whole other story. But when it comes to just that whole concept of dating or even married couples, there are some persons that it's difficult to even engage in the conversation of sex or intimacy because we have been so wounded and so bruised in that area. So, Dr. Ashley, would you say something just about that? Because I want to dive into a little something.
So it's not funny, but it's curious that people in my profession, my other profession, in the mental health field, even in marriage and family therapy, they're squeamish talking about sex. And I get it, I'm Freudian trained, so it's always about sex. I got that part. But it's just like, how do you talk about relationships and not
Mhm.
talk about the proverbial elephant in the room? And how do you have a conversation, and whether it was an unwelcome sexual advance or it's a welcomed advance, and their issues, whatever the case may be, it's just always amazing to me that caregivers, particularly mental health people, can think that it's okay not to have not to have conversations around sex and sexuality. And so when that happens, when I hear that, I've, good news, bad news, have had a number of patients who came to me from someplace else. They said, you know what, I want to talk about sex. And the therapist, got squeamish on me and didn't, change the subject, didn't want to go there. And it's like, no, you picked the right person. I start with that, when
Right.
you do the intake, that's the starting point, because there's a
Yeah.
lot of energy there. There's a lot of energy there. There are a lot of stories behind sex and sexuality, and what does that mean for us. And so I'm one of those weird, I guess, kind of preachers. I don't mind talking about it. I encourage it. I was fortunate in our household. Our parents had the talk very early on, had to talk about, impregnating, and talk about people touching you inappropriately, et cetera, et cetera. I'm the oldest of three, and my two sisters, they had to talk, if you will, with both of them. So I feel very privileged in that regard. Um,
Mhm.
but like, as you said earlier, it's important that you have a community, that you have people that support you. And unfortunately, I've heard far too often your story, James, where you shared it with the parents and they didn't, disbelief. The can't be, and they try to get you to change the story, or maybe you misinterpreted, or maybe it wasn't the way that you heard it or you experienced it, and that's a double wound, because you,
Mhm.
you have you have the woundedness of what happened to you in the beginning, and then you have this other woundedness of that what nobody believes, or people that you think that should believe and should support you and care. They're questioning what
Yeah.
your experience.
And I
So
and I have to commend James, because the reality is, well, James's parents, because it seemed as if when James told them, they listened. They listened and they received it. It wasn't like, no, James, that didn't happen to you. No, no, you're lying. And oftentimes, parents will quicker believe when it's someone outside of the family. When it's
yeah,
a
and
family member,
right,
they
right.
will not.
It's easier when it's somebody outside. When it's somebody inside,
Right.
it couldn't be the person we put on a pedestal. It
Right.
could.
Not cousin so and so, not uncle so and so, not your sister. Mm-hmm.
No, and then they get you to, as you said, kind of second guess and quaver. Well, maybe I did. No, you didn't misunderstand. There was a course that I would teach in the seminary, and we got past the part of all the academic kind of back and forth, got to the real stuff. And I would say, if you feel somebody was trying to hit on you, they were trying to hit on you. You don't
Mm.
need PhD to know somebody's hitting on you or not. If
Mm-hmm.
someone's coming
Mm-hmm.
in ways that are inappropriate, you know it, you sense it, you feel it. I mean, if you want to spiritualize, you can say God, Holy Spirit told you. However, it's
Right, right, right.
got it. You figured it out, and you um, I appropriately identified what was going on. So again, I want to commend you
I,
for your courage,
mhm.
for both of you, for your courage and to share. I've gone around New York metro area, and I would do a workshop around pornography. And one of the unintended consequences that I didn't expect, I should have, but didn't expect, is invariably after every time I did the workshop, and I'd say, if you want to talk to me privately, please feel free. Here's my number, whatever the case may be. And I don't think I cannot remember one time I gave the workshop, and if it wasn't three or four, usually men, that said, I was sexually abused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there were people that if you looked at them physically, like you were describing, you wouldn't, the muscles and the this and the that and da 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 da, and they would say, this is me now. And if I was analyzing them, it was, I would say, okay, so part of you living in the gym was because of what happened, and you're saying never again.
That's right. I need to protect myself now because I was taken advantage of early on. And so this is my mechanism to protect myself, to guard myself, right? And we do that often. We often do that. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, and maybe you can give us a little bit more insight. I often have debates, so to speak, with individuals when it comes to persons being married and sexual abuse or sexual trauma taking place in marriage. Oftentimes, people don't realize in James' situation, in my situation, we were children, we were young, but there are people that are married, and those of us that are in the church, those of us that we have this whole notion to become one. Yes, we have this whole notion that well, not all of us, but some, that the woman belongs to the man and her stuff is his stuff, right? Once they get married, and all I got to do is tap you and you got to turn over and open your, whatever is supposed to take place, right? That's the way so many people have been taught. So many people have been indoctrinated. But the reality is, right? That is not so, brother or sister. Just because she married you, your stuff don't belong to her, and your stuff don't belong to him, right? Your body is yours.
Have control over your body. And it's ironic that you bring that up. I was staff psychotherapist at Riverside Church for almost 10 years. And invariably, that very topic would come up in some way, shape, form. And people would try to attach a biblical verse to it to justify the behavior. And again, go through the checklist of you're this, and that, and say, so tell them or tell him, this is mine. I can do whatever I want. And say, no, actually, that's not correct.
Right.
And, unfortunately, they usually would not come back to therapy because they, didn't meet what they wanted. Right.
They wanted what they wanted to hear.
Right. Come back. But the other person was glad that someone in authority, quote unquote, said, no, that's not accurate. It's ironic. My first 3 cases, I finishing school and starting my own private practice, were 3 different women that happened to be Catholic, that said they were virgins, and they felt that their husbands had raped them, even though they were married. And you know what? I didn't watch pornography. I didn't, I wasn't looking at all those kind of pictures and stuff. This is my first experience of sex, but I know it's not this. And then they did know God has something different, because there was nothing about this consensual. There was nothing about this that was enjoyable, pleasurable, or any of the above. And it happened more than once. And so one, I need you to normalize, like, am I crazy for thinking that, this is not what marriage is all about? And then secondly, to help them deal with the trauma and to take control of their life again. And I think that's part of the healing process. And what each of you have said in your own way is, how do you regain control of your life once again?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, I'm going to ask just a couple more questions. We're going to be done in about 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. But I want to open up the ways for people on Facebook, as well as the people that are on YouTube, to go ahead and put your questions, if you have any questions, in. But I want to kind of segue into this whole notion of healing. And for me, it has been a journey for me to get to where I am, to be able to even speak about it, to become an advocate, to be able to be a safe space, or a safe space for people to come and share their stories. And I cry with you, I laugh with you, we walk this journey together, because it is not, this is not a club that I volunteered to be a part of. This is not a club that James volunteered to be a part of. But I believe that nothing that we've gone through is wasted. everything that we've gone through is able to be used to help, to bless, to encourage, to inspire somebody else. And so I want to ask James, and then I could talk about for myself. But James, what are some of the tools that you employ to help you on your journey to healing? What are some of the things that you would say you had to have in your toolbox to help you on this journey to get to where you are?
Okay. Well, one of the things I needed to do was adjust my mindset on what I thought I needed to be happy. Because, like I said, I thought I needed friends. I was lonely. So I had to find happiness in myself. I had to realize that although I was alone, that didn't mean that I was lonely. Just because I was alone or in solitude didn't mean that that necessarily meant I was alone. And I had to kind of start reevaluating the people in my life and kind of find not only my support system, like people who I can say that are more than friends, but also start to find little things in my day-to-day that make me happy. I came to a conclusion at a young age. I didn't have anything that made me happy. I had my dog, and that's why I work the field I do. And that kind of goes to show you how much, how much importance I put into my pet. That was my friend. That was my best friend. And I was an adult. I'm like, this is my way of giving back to, that animal or that species to help me get to where I am. I always say without my pets, I don't think I would have made it as far as I did. They brought companionship to me and allowed me to. They brought essentially the first step to foundation. They taught me that, hey, you can be loved for who you are, and it doesn't have to come with any cost.
Wow.
That's my biggest lesson that I took away from my pets. Because regardless of what kind of day I had, regardless of how I looked, regardless of even if I didn't even say hi to them at the beginning of the day, regardless, they always came to me at the end of the day, and they were there, and she was there for me. So that was the first few steps, and then I even told my mom
Even
this
when you didn't feed
nowadays.
them, even when you didn't feed them, James.
Right. Even if I didn't feed them, they still loved me. Even if I forgot, they still loved me. But one of the lessons I feel like that I currently employed and has, I think, helped me in my mental state, because shortly after that whole thing, I really was still struggling to rebuild my mental state. It would like go up a little bit and then just come crashing down. And there were times where I thought I was over it, and then I would go to talk to somebody about it, and I'd feel myself start shaking. I'd be scared, and I'd get emotional, and they could see that it was something that was so hard. So I made it a mission. Not only I said, I was like, this is not a secret. I was like, I had to tell myself, like, this is not a secret. I said, you shouldn't be ashamed to tell other people what you've been through, because you're not like, this is not your, like he said, this is not your fault. This is not, oh, because you were naive, this happened to you. Like, no, they took advantage of you. And because they took advantage of you, you must, share your story so it doesn't happen to other people. I have a lot of kind-hearted friends who I would have, if this happened to them, and I know, I don't know them that well, but I don't think they would be strong enough to come back. So because I know that there's people out there like that, I share my story. I made it a mission. I was like, when I become intimate with people, I tell them my story. I tell them what I've been through, just so that if they have any notion of anything going forward, to know that I'm, first of all, not the one to try any of that with, and two, for them to see that this is where I've come from and this is where I am now, and to see my growth, and just know that I'm not just some individual, I'm not just the victim, and that this is my story. So that was my mission. So I shared my story with a lot of individuals prior to even coming onto this show, and I made that a mental thing. When I went to therapy, I had a suicide attempt a few years back, and it kind of was a buildup of not just this, but other things in my life. My depression kind of just was getting out of control. I was having intimacy issues with people. I didn't feel like I was close to anybody, and I knew that was one part, that I just had this wall up from that incident that just stuck with me as I went through life. And so after I had the suicide attempt, I was forced into therapy as part of my release terms, and I discussed with the therapist this in great depth, and and that's when he told me, he was like, this trauma has caused you PTSD from the things that you described, because it was an incident where I had an argument with a friend, and they left me. Like, they were my ride, and they left me at the location. I was in my borough, but I didn't have my car, and I felt lost. And in that moment, I had my first real regression back to that time where I felt like I was wandering the streets, and at any point in time I was going to get grabbed. And my friend eventually did come back, like maybe like 15 minutes later, like realizing like what he had did. But by the time he came back, I was a mess. I was crying. I was hyperventilating. He thought I was going to pass out in the car. He knew my story. And when I explained it to him in the car while I was sobbing and stuff and why I felt like this, that's when he was really like, yo, this, I didn't realize that this had hurt you so deeply. And it did. And that was something else I needed to realize. Like, I tried to always tell myself like, oh, I'm, like I made it through this, but I made it through it. And I have I have things that I deal with currently because of this. And I had to come to terms with that as well. So it just was a bunch of, like I said, changing my mindset on the issue. I had to tell myself, one, is not a secret. So that was like step number 1. 2, you don't need friends to be happy. There's happiness all throughout life, like all throughout your day. That's why my mom, I said, I stood in the sun for 15 minutes the other day and I found so much happiness in just feeling the sun on my face. I said, it's these little things, I come home from work, my dog greets me at the door. I said, it's these little things. And then the more I start finding these little things that made me happy, the happier I became. And eventually I was having happy consecutive days. And that's when I knew that I had, made it full circle. I knew that I wasn't the same person I was back then. I knew that James, was there. And if my current James could see, if my past self could see my current self, that he would be proud. That he wouldn't. I don't even think my past self even thought my current self could exist. Like I told Dr. K, there was a point in time where I didn't think I was ever going to come out to my father.
Sure.
And this incident happened, and then it was all out, and then we went through our rough patch, and now we're actually in a good space. And now as an adult, due to the fact that I had all this stuff going on as a child, I told my mom this the other day. I said, as an adult, as 23 years old, I'm just now learning my dad. I'm just now, I guess, learning his personality. I'm finding things that he finds interesting, and we're actually connecting. And it's what I've always wanted when growing up. That I wanted us to connect, because I felt like there was such a huge disconnect. I'm like, I'm gay, he's straight. He doesn't like gay people. I know this is what I am, but I'm trying to be straight for him. So at the same token, he's not getting aspects of my personality that are great, and I'm not getting his full potential because he just doesn't know what his son is. And now that we're all on the same page, he knows I consider myself openly gay, and I consider myself openly gay because if anybody asks or looked at me or anything, I'm not ashamed for them to assume that I'm gay. That some people have that issue where they don't want to be perceived as homosexual, but I have come to terms. I'm like, I do not. I'm like, they're like, oh, you're gonna wear that? Yes, I'm gonna wear this.
That's why James had his shoulders out on Easter Sunday. That's
yes.
Dr. Ashley. Dr. Ashley. I felt that little inside joke. But Dr. Ashley, I have a question coming to us from YouTube. And another Reverend Doctor, another preacher. He says, so question for clarity. So childhood sexual trauma is not gender specific, correct?
Correct. Right. It can happen to men and women. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. Look, it's sexual abuse, childhood or adult or what, is not gender specific, right?
Correct.
It can happen to both men and women. Right.
Clearly, the percentages are not equal, but it does happen to both.
Right. And one of the things, like I shared last year when we had this conversation with Kenny Anderson, who, as you all know, is an NBA. He's a Queens boy. He's a guy from Queens. He's an NBA player, former NBA player. He's now the current basketball coach at my alma mater at Fisk University. And one of the things that he shared at the time was the fact that for him, a lot of it had to do with power. It was like a power thing because for him, it was a coach, right? So for me, it was an older person. Everybody was older, right? But I keep going back to in my mind, do you remember the movie Anton Fisher? The movie Anton Fisher, I believe it was the babysitter or the aunt, or it was an older female who, I think it was the babysitter that like kissed him or touched him or, whatever. And it was just very uncomfortable. And so, and then earlier this week, I posted a photo, and you can look on my social media, you'll see the photo was 4 different pictures. And one of the pictures, I've gotten a few questions about it, was a photo of, clearly it was a man with a woman's hand over his mouth, and he had on like a wedding ring, but she had money in her hand. Each photo was a photo of kind of showing what people use to seduce or to bait the person. There was another female, there was a female's photo with tears in her eyes, and it was a man's hand, and he had a rose in his hand. There was a child. They had a lollipop in that person's hand, and then they had a little boy, and it was rosary, like the Catholic rosary beads. And so oftentimes in all of these, money and status is often used as something to hold over someone for sexual trauma, for sexual abuse, for sexual assault, for sexual harassment, even in the workplace, status, money, being able to get a raise, your boss, your supervisor. These are some of the things I just want people to be aware of as we, come to a close in our conversation. We could talk about this all night, but these are some things that we want people to be aware of. It can be your husband, it can be your wife, it can be your next door neighbor, it can be any of these individuals in your circle of influence. But tonight I think we had a very interesting perspective because we deal with the children. When we deal with children, this also being Child Abuse Awareness Month and Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we kind of put the two together tonight, but we are able to see where a child who did not get the talk becomes vulnerable, right? Because I would dare to say that if you did have the talk, James, and you tell me if I'm wrong, if someone did have the conversation with you, you might have been quicker to say something. If you knew matter-of-factly, like us feeling at a young age, us feeling like something is wrong, but also knowing that is wrong, it's two different things, So when a child is told, when we talk about the body parts, tell your children, that's your private part. That's your, don't touch this, don't touch that. Nobody should be touching you here. Nobody should be touching you there. If someone has that conversation with you, and then you are in a position where someone does do that, you're quicker to go and tell someone. But if you're not sure, it felt funny when they touched me there, but I don't know if I'm supposed to say anything. I don't know, it's a whole different dialogue, a whole different conversation. For me, it was made into a game. It was made into a game, and I was not the only player. Let's just say that. And one of the side effects that I know that I had, and after doing some research, I found out, and this is for all you parents and adults out there, one of the major side effects for children that are victims of sexual trauma is bedwetting. Bedwetting is one of the number one telltale signs that a child has been sexually abused. I used to wet my bed all the time. All the time I was wetting my bed, right? But I didn't, of course, at that time I didn't know. My parents didn't know. People didn't know. But this whole forum is to help inform you, educate you, talk about things that we are not talking about, so you can hear from someone who it's happened to. You can hear from an expert, and you can gain the information and insight you want. Let me just check, gentlemen, and see if there are any other questions. I don't see any other questions. James, you got a shout out from somebody. When you at your leisure, you can go ahead and say, hey, somebody gave you a shout out. Somebody knows you. James said, hey. All right. And again, I want to say thank you to both of you gentlemen for coming out tonight, for your courage, for your availability. Thank you, Dr. Ashley, for coming and stepping in at the last minute. We hope this won't be the end of our relationship with Liberated to Love. We hope that when we have our actual in-person conference, you will have your face in the place and be able to share from your well of knowledge. But I'm going to give you gentlemen a few seconds to think about your last liberating thought, what you'd like to leave our audience with. And while you all are thinking about that, as you all know, I have a company called Liberty Life. Notice I'm liberated to love, living the liberated life. And Liberty Life, right? And we do candles, we do teas, and all of those are part of my soul care and my own therapy and my journey of healing. And so one of the things that I've created was I created a cause candle. The cause is sexual assault, sexual assault. And this is the candle for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And the name of this candle is Liberated. So when you burn this, you will be prayerfully feel a sense of liberation. This candle is a beautiful blend of healing oils, particularly rose and lily of the valley. And if you look either one of those scents up, you will find out the Rose of Sharon and Lily of the Valley. Those are both biblical, but they smell wonderful. Smells very nice, clean, very light, and it's beautiful. And so you can get these on our Shopify, in our Shopify store. I will place the link on all of my social media outlets, and this is going for $20 this month. So I want you to go ahead and get your Liberated candles, and stay tuned for our teas, because guess what? I'm going to pick them up really, really soon. So, Brother James, I'm going to go ahead and start with you and allow you to share your last thought before we close tonight.
Something I was just thinking about, or an emotion I feel like that I felt that a lot of people at some point in time I can relate to, whether they've been sexually assaulted or not, is that after the assault, one of the things I struggled to feel was, I feel like I stopped loving myself. I definitely, I can attribute a lot of the after effects of this to a lack of love for myself. And so I just want to leave, I guess, all viewers and stuff with the message of, you should never stop loving yourself. You are your own gift. Every day you wake up and walk this earth and the sun graces your face, you are a gift to this earth. And whether you know it or not, there's a future past what you're going through. And I feel like that was something I needed to, make concrete in myself, that, this is not the end. Life does go on. And just because I feel like this now doesn't mean that it's going to last forever.
That's right. That's beautiful. Thank you, James. That was beautiful. Beautiful, Strasha. Beautiful, James. Yes. And Dr. Ashley.
Again, I want to say thank you, and thank you for the resources I see you've been posting throughout this show. Thank you for having this conversation. You had mentioned the Body Keeps the Score. There's another book by Babbitt Rothschild, which says The Body Remembers, but they kind of both say the same thing, that our body locks in those memories. And so that being said, I want to just lift up again the what was considered the mother of Black psychiatry. Phyllis Harrison Ross was a pediatrician, psychiatrist, and again, she would say, "There's nothing wrong with you. What happened to you is wrong, and let's talk about it."
That's good. That's really good. That's really good. There's nothing wrong with you, my brother, my sister. What happened to you is wrong. And one of the premises for Liberated to Love is our goals is to bring you back to the place where you love God, love yourself, and you love others again. That brings us back to what James said. Many of us lose love for God because we feel like God was there when it happened. We lose love for ourselves because we feel like we did something wrong, or we lose love for others because they are the ones who offended us. But our goal is to help you to get back to the place where you love God, you love yourself, and you love others again. And as I share with you all the time, I want you to take this information. Don't just keep it to yourself. Go ahead and share it with your friends, with your family, your neighbors. Somebody in your circle needs this information. 1 out of 4 women are victims of sexual trauma, and I think it's 1 out of 5 men. And so I need you guys to go out there, share this message. You can share it. I want you to comment. I want you to like. I want you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have a plethora of great information that's coming your way. More to come in this sexual trauma, sexual abuse awareness month. But as always, I love you. I want you to live a liberated life. And don't forget, next Thursday is my birthday. Woo!
Yes.
So the celebration started on April 1st, but we
Okay.
really started tonight. So I love you all. There's nothing you can do about it. I want James and Dr. Ashley to stay on after I close this show, but be sure to share with a friend, share with a neighbor, and I'll see you soon.